So in this lesson, we're going to take a look at some different things with properties of multiplication involving exponents. But first, some review stuff from the previous lesson that we did. So if you look at this first example here, this 5x squared times negative 2x cubed. So just first talking about sort of how you would work something like this out. So remember, 5x squared really means 5 times x squared, which would be x times x, and then got the times in the middle, and then negative 2x cubed would be negative 2 times x cubed would be x times x times x. So you have that there. So now I'm going to multiply together the terms that are alike. So I'm going to start with the 5 and the negative 2. So 5 times negative 2, that's negative 10. And then x times x times x times x times x, that would be a shorter way of saying that would be x to the 5th power. So we also talked about some shortcuts with some things like this too. So if you take a look here, for the shortcut with this, we would say first we would want to multiply the coefficients. That's the numbers in front of each of the terms. 5 times negative 2 is negative 10. And then for the variables, x squared, x cubed. So remember, when the bases are the same, the shortcut there is to add the exponents. So 2 plus 3 would be 5. So this would be x to the 5th. So you can see I get the same answer as that right there. So that was number one. And just notice with that, there's just one variable in the problem there. Whereas for number two, there's now two different variables. There's a's and there's b's. So a couple different things with this. First is there's no number in front of that a, so I'm going to put a 1 there. So this right here, negative 1ab squared would be negative 1 times a times b squared would be b times b. And then I got the times in the middle. And then 3a squared b would be 3 times a squared would be a times a, and then times b at the end. So once again, I'm going to multiply together the parts that are alike. So I have negative 1 times 3. Those are the coefficients. So that would be negative 3. And then I have for the a's, this would be a shorter way of saying a times a would be a cubed. And then a shorter way of saying b times b times b would be b cubed. So you'd have something like that there. So once again, if we're talking shortcuts, right, what I would say here was I would take the coefficients, once again, 1 in front of that a. So I would start with negative 1 times 3 would be negative 3. And then for the exponents, this a right here, remember there's no power there, so that would be a to the first. Same as there would be here, there's no power here with this b, so that would be b to the first. So if I went with the a's, a to the first, a squared, 1 plus 2 is 3. That would be a cubed. And then here with the b's, because the bases are the same, I can add those exponents. 2 plus 1 would be 3, so that would be b cubed. And you can see there, I get the same answer as I did when I worked that one out. So some other examples that were similar to this than what we did in the previous lesson. So just kind of talking a little bit now about just some of the shortcuts involved here. So for number 3, the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply negative 2 times negative 7. That's positive 14. And then for the exponents, remember this is x to the first. So when I do x to the 4th times x to the first, because the bases are the same, I can add the exponents. So 4 plus 1 would be 5. So that would be x to the 5th power there. And then for number 4, a couple things I need to look at before I start this. So first would be I got to put a 1 in front of each of those x's, and then this would be x to the first and y to the first. So I would have 1 times 1 is 1, and then x squared, x to the first. So because the bases are the same, I can add those exponents. So 3 plus 1 would be 4, so that's x to the 4th. And then for the y's, let me kind of clean this up a little bit. And then for the y's, I'd have y squared and y to the first. 2 plus 1 would be 3, so that would be y cubed. So you'd have something like that there. And then for number 5, I'm going to do the coefficients first. Negative 3 times 2 is negative 6. And then for the x's, just note that this is x to the first. So I have x squared and x to the first. 2 plus 1 was 3, so that would be x cubed. And then for the y's, I'd have y to the 4th and y cubed. 3 plus 4 would be 7. So that would be y to the 7th for something like that. So that's just some review stuff that we did from the previous lesson. And that's one type of multiplication problem that we looked at. Another type is something that looks like this. And if you notice with this now, there's parentheses involved, and there's also exponents both inside and outside the parentheses. So sometimes we refer to this as repeated exponentiation. Sometimes it's also referred to as what are called double exponents. So I'm going to first focus on the exponent that's on the outside of the parentheses there. So just remember that to take something to the third power means to multiply it by itself 3 times. So when we say x squared cubed, what that really means is x squared times x squared times x squared. And if you take a look at just that right there, that was what we did in the previous lesson. So when the bases are the same, right, each of the bases are x's here, I can add the exponents. 2 plus 2 plus 2 would be 6. So the answer to this would be x to the 6th power. Now there is a shortcut involved here. So anytime you have double exponents where you have parentheses and an exponent both inside and outside the parentheses, the shortcut is to simply just take the exponents and multiply them together. So 2 times 3 is 6. So we would say here that the answer to this would be x to the 6th power. And you can see the shortcut gets you the same answer as if you had worked it out. So some other things that we kind of do with this is we take the same sort of concept, but now we have coefficients in front of the variables. So just remember that negative 2x cubed really means negative 2 times x cubed, and then the whole thing to the 4th power. So just notice inside here, there's 2 different terms. There's the negative 2 and there's the x cubed. And each one of those I'm going to take to the 4th power. So I'm going to start with the negative 2 to the 4th. So this would be negative 2 to the 4th power times in the middle. And then I have x cubed to the 4th power. So really what I'm doing is I'm just taking the terms that are inside the parentheses, I'm breaking those up, and I'm taking both of them to the 4th power here. So negative 2 to the 4th, that just means negative 2 times itself 4 times. Right? So if I did negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2 times negative 2, that's positive 16. Now that's also something you can do in your calculator here. So just notice I'm going to type this in just as it's written with the negative 2 in the parentheses and then to the 4th power. So that's positive 16. So you can get answers to those in your calculator, where with this right here, right, x cubed to the 4th. So once again, because I have these double exponents here, the shortcut is to multiply them. So x cubed to the 4th, we would say, is x to the 12th power. So if you were going to use your calculator to check your answer to something like that, and I showed you something similar to this in the previous lesson when we were doing the other type of multiplication problem, what I want to do first is I want to store a number in for x, because it doesn't say here what x stands for. It's just asking me to simplify. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make up a number for x. So once again, just remember, don't choose 0 or 1 when you make up a number for x. So I'm going to put a 5 in for x, let's say. So I'm going to do 5 and then the store key and then x. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to type in the question first. So the question here was parentheses, negative 2 x cubed, right? End of parentheses, and then the whole thing to the 4th power. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get an answer to that. Okay, pretty big number, and that's because I have a 5 that I'm storing in for the x there. Then what we're going to do is we're going to type in what we said the answer to this was. So the answer to this we said was 16 x to the 12th power. And what I'm looking to see when I do this is, do I get the same answers when I type in the question and the answer? So you can see here, because these are the same, that tells me that this right here is in fact the answer to that problem. So that's just something you can do in your calculator to check your answers when you get to the end for something like that. So some other types of examples involve multiple variables. So once again, a squared b cubed really means a squared times b cubed, and I'm going to take each of those terms to the 4th power. So first I'm going to start with this, a squared to the 4th power. So I have this here. A squared to the 4th power. And then I have this here, b cubed to the 4th power. So I got times b cubed to the 4th power. So once again, if you notice with this, I have double exponents. So I have a squared to the 4th. So the shortcut when you have the double exponents is to multiply. So this would be a to the 8th power. And then the same thing here. The shortcut with this double exponents is to multiply. So that would be b to the 12th power. So you'd have something like that there. So I can do the same thing even if there's multiple variables. I'm still multiplying the exponents when there's double exponents there. Then we also have something like this. So this is not just two different variables, but also a coefficient in front of the term. So just notice there's no number in front of the x, so I'm going to put a 1 there. So this is really negative 1 to the third power, and then I have x to the first to the third power, and then y squared to the third power. So this really just comes out to be something like this. So I got negative 1 to the third power times x to the first to the third power times y squared to the third power. So negative 1 to the third power, that's negative 1 times negative 1 times negative 1, right? And that would be negative 1. So once again, that's also something that you could do in here. Just notice I'm going to type this in just like it's written in the problem. So I have the negative 1 in parentheses to the third power would be negative 1. And then here I got the double exponents, right? X to the first to the third. 1 times 3 is 3, so this would be x cubed. And then here I have the double exponents again. 2 times 3 is 6, so this would be y to the sixth power. So that's what you get when you do something like that. So just notice there were three terms here. I had the negative 1, the x, and the y, and that's why I had the three parts out here that I was going to simplify and then put my answer all together at the end there for something like that. So just some different things to remember steps-wise, and similar to the steps that I gave you with the other type of multiplication problem, these first two steps are more or less things that you want to look at before you start the problem. So that's just if you have a term with no number in front of it, just make sure you put a 1 there. And if you have any variable with no exponent showing, just make sure you put a 1 there too. Then from the next thing, we're going to expand the problem, which is basically we're going to rewrite it with each of the terms taken to the power that's on the outside of the parentheses, and then we're going to put everything together at the end there for something like that. So that's the other type of multiplication problem that we look at involving variables and exponents. In the next lesson, what we're going to take a look at is just some different things involving division and some of the different properties there.